Thomas Reynolds had grown used to the silence. After his wife passed away 5 years ago and his children moved across the country with only the occasional phone call, the old Kansas house felt more like a tomb than a home. The echoes of laughter and life had long faded, replaced by the creak of floorboards and the hum of an empty fridge. He rarely ventured out anymore, just the essentials. Groceries, a doctor's appointment now and then, maybe church if he could muster the strength. But loneliness is a quiet kind of pain, and over time, it began to gnaw at him. It was his friend Jim who finally said what Thomas couldn't admit. "You need company, Tom." Not people, necessarily, just something to keep your heart open. Jim had mentioned the shelter, even joked that a dog might be the only creature stubborn enough to get through to him. Skeptical but curious, Thomas found himself walking toward the local animal shelter on a breezy afternoon, hands in his jacket pockets, mind swirling with doubt and grief. The place was modest, well kept, but nothing fancy. A young woman at the front greeted him with a smile that felt too bright for such a gray day. "Here to adopt?" she asked warmly. Thomas hesitated. "Maybe just need some company," he muttered, eyes downcast. She understood without prying and led him to the quieter wing in the back where the more withdrawn dogs stayed. As he moved past the kennels, he saw wagging tails, hopeful eyes, some barking for attention, but none of them spoke to him. That is, until he reached the far corner. There, lying silently, was a large German shepherd, battered not in body, but in spirit. The dog didn't rise, didn't bark. Just stared into the distance, eyes dark and distant like he was somewhere else entirely. Thomas froze, something twisting in his chest. There was a look in the dog's face he'd seen before in the mirror, after the war. "What about him?" he asked softly. The volunteer paused. "That's Bravo. He's complicated, doesn't socialize much, had some trauma. We've had trouble finding him a home." She didn't sugarcoat it, and Thomas appreciated that. Still, he knelt down in front of the kennel. "Complicated, huh?" he murmured. "Looks like we've got that in common." At the sound of his voice, Bravo stirred just slightly. He didn't retreat, didn't growl, just tilted his head, ears flicking forward with a cautious curiosity. Thomas extended a hand through the bars, half expecting the dog to ignore him, but Bravo leaned in slowly and sniffed. Their eyes met just for a second, and in that moment, something passed between them. Not trust, not yet, but recognition. Two souls scarred by the battles they never chose to fight, each carrying ghosts that wouldn't let them sleep. The volunteer blinked in surprise. He usually keeps to himself. He's never responded like that to anyone. Thomas gave a faint smile, still watching the dog. Maybe he sees something familiar. That night, paperwork was filled out, questions answered, and a leash was gently handed over. As the shelter doors closed behind them, Thomas glanced down at Bravo walking beside him, slow and stiff, like he hadn't known comfort in years. "Well, Bravo," he said quietly, "let's see if we can help each other figure this out." And just like that, two strangers became the start of something neither of them expected, a chance at healing. The first few days with Bravo were quiet, tense even. The dog moved through Thomas's home like it was enemy territory. Every sound, every shadow seemed to trigger some silent alarm. Thomas had seen this kind of behavior before, not in animals, but in men. The kind who came back from war with their bodies intact, but their nerves frayed to shreds. Bravo would pace the hallway at night, claws clicking softly against the wood floors, pausing every so often to stare out the window like he expected something or someone to come through it. Even during the day, he was hyper-vigilant, ears swiveling at the sound of passing cars, tail stiff at the whir of the refrigerator motor. When Thomas grabbed a leash for a walk, Bravo would snap to attention with a stiffness that didn't match a pet dog. It was military. The rigid posture, the constant scanning of surroundings, the way he walked slightly ahead, as if leading a patrol, it all felt too deliberate, too trained. Thomas had a gut feeling, the kind that had once kept him alive overseas. This wasn't just a nervous dog. Bravo had been somewhere. He had done something. One night, Thomas lay in bed listening to the soft pacing outside his door. He stared at the ceiling, thoughts swirling in the dark. His own memories crept in faces he had lost, nights filled with the roar of gunfire and the suffocating fear of not making it home. He wondered what Bravo saw in his own mind when the world got too quiet. Could he have been a working dog? A 9? It wasn't far-fetched. Plenty of military dogs, after losing their handlers or retiring, ended up in shelters with no paperwork and no one to claim them. Some carried scars so deep they never fully came back. The more Thomas watched Bravo, the more the pieces began to fit. The silence, the awareness, the way he responded to commands without hesitation, it was too precise to be coincidence. Determined to find out, Thomas made a decision. The next morning, he picked up the phone and called Jim, his old friend from the service. If anyone knew someone with access to military dog records, it'd be him. When Jim picked up, his gravelly voice was like a lifeline. "Hey Tom, long time. What's going on?" Thomas explained everything: Bravo's behavior, his instincts, and the strange familiarity in the dog's demeanor. "You think he's a vet?" Jim asked. "I think he's one of us," Thomas replied. Jim didn't laugh or brush it off. "Could be," he said thoughtfully. "You said he's a German Shepherd. A lot of those dogs served. If no one adopts them, they end up in shelters, just like people falling through the cracks. I know a guy. He might be able to look into it if you get me the dog's microchip number." The conversation lit a small fire of hope inside Thomas. He hung up and grabbed his jacket, heading back to the shelter with purpose. When he asked the volunteer about the microchip information, she looked surprised. "Not many people ever asked for that," she said, but she was quick to help. Within minutes, she handed him the paperwork with the number scrawled in the top corner. Thomas thanked her and called Jim on the way home, reciting the digits slowly. "Got it?" Jim replied. "Give me a few hours." Back at the house, Thomas tried to settle in. Bravo lay near his feet, unusually still, eyes occasionally flicking toward the window. There was something heavy in the room that neither of them could name. That evening, as the sky turned a bruised purple outside, the phone finally rang. "Tom?" Jim's voice came through, lower now, almost cautious. "You're not going to believe this. His name's Sergeant Bravo. He served in Afghanistan as a bomb detection dog with the Marines. His handler was killed 2 years ago in an ambush. After that, he was retired. Somehow, he ended up in the shelter system. Poor guy's been through hell." Thomas sat in stunned silence. He looked over at Bravo lying still, ears twitching slightly as if he sensed the gravity in the air. Sergeant Bravo. The name hit him in the chest like a memory he hadn't lived. It all made sense. Now the tension, the nightmares, the way he scanned the horizon like he was still waiting for danger to appear. Bravo hadn't just been abandoned, he'd lost the one person who probably meant the world to him. Thomas's voice was low when he finally spoke. "Damn, I figured he had a past. But not like this." After hanging up with Jim, Thomas sat down next to Bravo, resting his hand gently on the dog's head. Bravo didn't flinch. He just sighed long and deep, like someone letting go of something they'd carried too long. "You're not alone anymore," Thomas whispered. And this time, when Bravo looked up at him, his eyes didn't look quite so lost. The news hit Thomas harder than he expected. He sat on the edge of his recliner, the phone still warm in his hand, Jim's voice echoing in his ears. "Sergeant Bravo. Bomb detection. Afghanistan. Handler killed in an ambush." Words like that didn't just paint a picture, they opened a door. Suddenly, Thomas could see it all: the dust, the gunfire, the panic in the air as lives were upended in seconds. He imagined Bravo, muzzle low, ears pinned back, searching the wreckage for the one person he trusted most. Losing a handler wasn't like losing an owner. It was like losing a brother in arms, someone who spoke without words, who shared every mission, every heartbeat. And when that bond was severed violently, without warning, it left a wound deeper than anything visible. Thomas looked down at Bravo, who now lay quietly on the rug, his breathing even but guarded. That dog wasn't just anxious, he was grieving. He was a soldier who'd seen too much and never got the chance to say goodbye. As the morning sun climbed higher, Thomas poured himself a cup of coffee and stepped out onto the front porch. Bravo followed, resting at his feet like a sentry on duty. He didn't sleep the way normal dogs did, always half alert, always watching. Thomas knew that posture well. He used to sit like that in airports, in crowded diners, always scanning exits, always choosing the seat with his back to the wall. "You're still on guard, huh?" he murmured. Bravo didn't move, but his ears flicked at the sound of Thomas's voice. The unspoken understanding between them felt stronger than ever. They were both survivors, both shaped by chaos and loss, trying to rebuild something with the pieces they had left. For Thomas, knowing the truth about Bravo didn't make things harder, it gave everything meaning. Every twitch, every flinch, every night of pacing made sense now. It wasn't misbehavior, it was muscle memory. It was trauma carved into instinct. And if Bravo had once given everything for a country that had quietly let him slip through the cracks, then Thomas would be damned if he let the dog face the rest of his life alone. That afternoon, Thomas pulled out an old laptop and began researching retired Nines, how they were trained, what they endured, how they were supposed to transition into civilian life. The reality was sobering. These dogs had saved countless lives, walked through minefields, sniffed out ides, chased down insurgents, and when their service ended, many were lost in paperwork, shipped to shelters with no handlers, no debriefing, no goodbye. Thomas's heart ached reading through the stories, especially the ones that mirrored Bravo's. But they also gave him a plan. He jotted down notes, bookmarked resources, and made a list of things he could do to help Bravo heal. He read that play therapy could reduce anxiety in retired working dogs, and that structure and calm environments were critical to recovery. So later that day, Thomas took an old tennis ball from the garage and stepped into the yard. "Let's see what you've got, Sarge," he said gently, tossing the ball a few feet across the grass. Bravo stood still, watching it with suspicion at first. Then, slowly, he patted over, picked it up, and brought it back tail wagging just slightly. Thomas laughed, a real laugh he hadn't heard from himself in years. "Good boy," he whispered. There was a small moment, barely anything at all. But for them, it was everything a symbol that maybe, just maybe, the road ahead didn't have to be so dark. In the days that followed, Thomas took things slow. He didn't push Bravo, didn't force affection, didn't expect quick fixes. Healing wasn't about snapping fingers. It was about patience, about showing up, again and again, until fear started to give way to familiarity. Thomas began with routines. Every morning, they had the same walk, quiet streets, and the park before the world got too loud. Bravo still walked slightly ahead, alert and cautious, but now he'd glance back at Thomas every so often, like checking to make sure his new partner was still there. Inside the house, Thomas kept the noise low, gave Bravo space, and let him approach on his own terms. The TV stayed off most days. Instead, the house filled with the soft sound of Thomas humming as he cooked, or the rustle of newspaper pages turning. And Bravo, though still guarded, started following him from room to room, never too close, but never far either. At night, he'd lay a little closer to Thomas's recliner, the constant pacing now broken up by longer stretches of rest. These weren't dramatic changes, but they mattered. Each small sign meant Bravo was starting to feel, if not safe, then at least understood. Thomas also kept reading, learning everything he could about trauma in retired military dogs. He found articles written by former handlers, guides about decompression, stories of trust rebuilt one command, one gesture at a time. It was a different kind of battle one fought with tennis balls and soft voices instead of rifles and orders, but a battle all the same. One afternoon, he decided to test Bravo's comfort with play again. This time, he tossed the tennis ball across the yard with a little more enthusiasm. Bravo hesitated, ears pinned slightly back, eyes scanning as if expecting a hidden threat. But when Thomas crouched down and gently said, "Go on, you got it," something shifted. Bravo moved, a little quicker now, and brought the ball back. The second throw went smoother, and the third brought an actual tail wag. Thomas felt his chest tighten, not from fear or sadness, but something else, pride. It had been so long since he'd felt proud of something. That evening, Bravo lay down beside him on the porch as the sun dipped behind the trees. For the first time, the dog rested his head on Thomas's knee. The weight of it felt grounding, like an unspoken thank you, like a shared vow. "We're in this together." Word spread quietly around the neighborhood about the new dog. During a walk one morning, a neighbor named Bill called out from across the street. "Hey Tom, who's the big guy?" he asked with a friendly grin. "His name's Bravo," Thomas replied, reaching down to give the dog a calm pat. Bill walked over, keeping a respectful distance. "He looks like a good one, loyal." Thomas nodded, his voice quiet. "He's been through a lot, but we're figuring it out." Bill didn't ask more, just gave a knowing smile and a small wave before walking off. Encounters like that became small tests for Bravo new faces, new voices, and with each one, the dog stayed a little steadier. Sometimes his tail would wag. Sometimes he'd just watch, body still, but not stiff. Progress. That night, Thomas sat on the porch again. Bravo curled beside him, both of them wrapped in the kind of silence that didn't ache anymore. He looked up at the stars, breathed in the cool evening air, and whispered, "We're getting somewhere, huh?" Bravo didn't move, but his breathing was slow, peaceful. For the first time in years, Thomas didn't feel like a man waiting for life to pass him by. He felt like a man building something again, one step, one walk, one moment at a time. Thomas knew better than to expect a straight path to recovery. Healing never moved in a perfect line. It zigzagged, it stalled, it sometimes went backward before it moved forward again. There were good days when Bravo would rest beside him on the porch or respond calmly to new faces in the neighborhood, and then there were the hard days like the morning a garbage truck rattled down their street and Bravo froze, every muscle tense, his eyes wide with alarm. Thomas had seen that look before on soldiers cornered in the dust, waiting for something to explode. Without a word, he crouched beside the dog, placed a steady hand on Bravo's back, and whispered, "It's okay. Just a truck." His voice was soft but sure. He stayed there with him until Bravo's breathing slowed, until the tension melted, even if just a little. Moments like that reminded Thomas just how deep Bravo's scars ran, but they also reminded him how far the dog had come. There was a time Bravo wouldn't have let him get that close now. He trusted him enough to stay grounded in his presence. And Thomas, well, he found a strange kind of healing in helping someone else through the very darkness he had once walked alone. That week, Thomas decided to introduce Bravo to Karen, a local trainer who specialized in working with former military and police dogs. The training facility was quiet, surrounded by a fence and set against a backdrop of trees. Karen greeted them warmly, crouched to Bravo's level, and let him approach on his terms. "You've got a strong one here," she said after watching him for a minute. Thomas explained Bravo's background, the trauma, the suspicion, the moments of peace, and Corinne nodded, no judgment in her eyes. She led them through a few simple exercises, calming drills, commands paired with gentle reinforcement, stress reduction routines. At first, Bravo was stiff, distracted by every sound and shift in the air, but Thomas stayed close, his voice low and steady. "Focus on me, Bravo," he said, again and again. Slowly, the dog's attention shifted from the world around him to the man beside him. Karen noticed. "You're becoming his anchor," she said. "He's watching you more than anything else. That's a good sign." Thomas didn't say much, but something in his chest swelled. After the session, they walked home through the quiet town, the leash loose in Thomas's hand, Bravo trotting beside him, not perfectly relaxed, but steady. And steady was enough. Back at home, the rhythm continued. Each day brought small victories. Bravo started greeting Thomas at the door when he came in from errands, tail wagging slow but sure. He'd curl up closer during the evenings, sometimes even climbing onto the couch to rest his head on Thomas's lap. On one of those nights, Jim dropped by for a visit. "You and that dog," he said with a low whistle, watching Bravo rest calmly by Thomas's feet. "Looks like you've both come a long way." Thomas nodded, a quiet smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "We're learning to trust again," he said simply. Jim clapped him on the shoulder. "About damn time." They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun disappear behind the trees, and for once, the quiet didn't feel heavy. It felt full. Later that week, Thomas invited Bill and his dog over to test Bravo's comfort with other animals. Bravo stiffened at first. Years back, muscles coiled, but Thomas stayed calm, offering quiet encouragement. After a few minutes, Bravo sniffed the smaller dog, his tail giving a tentative wag. Thomas breathed out a soft laugh. Good boy. That night, for the first time since he brought him home, Bravo didn't pace the hallway. Instead, he slept near the door, steady breathing, filling the space that used to echo with loneliness. The war wasn't over, but they were finally learning how to live in peace. The days slowly began to take shape around a new kind of normal. Morning walks in the quiet park became their ritual. Thomas with his slow, thoughtful steps, and Bravo walking beside him, no longer scouting every shadow like an ambush was hiding there. The dog still flinched sometimes at loud noises or sudden movements, but he didn't freeze anymore. He'd glance up at Thomas for reassurance and keep moving. And that to Thomas meant everything. It reminded him of his own journey years ago when he came home from war and didn't know how to sleep through the night, how to laugh without guilt, or how to trust the quiet. Back then, it was a therapist who had said, "You can't erase what happened, but you can learn to live beyond it." Now, he found himself passing that same lesson along, not with words, but with patience, presence, and love. Bravo had gone from a silent, ghost-like figure to a companion who sought out Thomas's touch, who curled beside him during storms, who learned slowly that not every bang or shout meant danger. Healing wasn't fast, and it wasn't perfect, but it was real, it was happening. and Thomas could feel it in the way Bravo no longer guarded the door but laid down in front of it, eyes soft, breathing steady. One afternoon, Thomas decided it was time to take one more step forward, not just for Bravo, but for himself. He hadn't visited the Veterans Memorial downtown since he moved back. It had always felt too heavy, too close. But something in him shifted, a quiet need to stop avoiding the things he used to bury. He put on a clean shirt, clipped Bravo's leash, and they walked together in silence. When they reached the stone monument, Thomas stood for a long time, reading names carved into granite. Some he knew, some he didn't. His eyes landed on one in particular, Mike H., a name that pulled at the edges of his memory like a whisper from another life. Bravo sat beside him, calm, watchful. Thomas placed a hand on the cool surface of the memorial and whispered, "I'm still here. And I'm trying to make it count. No parade, no grand speech. Just a man, a dog, and a quiet promise to the past." On the walk home, he didn't feel haunted like he used to. He felt grounded. That evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, Thomas and Bravo sat on the porch together. The breeze was warm and the sky burned with gold and orange. Bravo rested his head on Thomas's leg. Thomas sipped his coffee and said softly, "We made it through another day, buddy." And Bravo, in the way dogs do, seemed to understand. Their story might have begun with lost two strangers, both broken in ways the world didn't always see, but it had grown into something greater, a bond built on patience, quiet resilience, and mutual healing. Thomas often thought about how close he'd come to walking right past Bravo that day at the shelter, how easy it would have been to choose a younger, friendlier dog. But he didn't. Maybe it was fate, maybe it was recognition. Whatever it was, it had saved them both. And in watching Bravo come back to life, Thomas found parts of himself he thought were gone forever: hope, purpose, peace. This wasn't just a story about a dog or a veteran or even trauma. It was a story about what can happen when we choose to show up for others and for ourselves. Not every battle is fought with weapons. Some are fought with kindness, patience, and the courage to sit beside someone in the dark until the light comes back. If there's one lesson in all this, it's that healing isn't something you have to do alone. Sometimes, the quietest companions carry the loudest impact, and sometimes the ones who need saving the most are the very ones who end up saving us.